Chances are, when you ate a sandwich as a kid, it included at least 2 slices of Wonder Bread. It's the ultimate easy food, basic and straightforward. But did you know that the history of white bread, which led to Wonder Bread, is far more complex and not as innocent as it seems? In today's video, we're diving into the dark history of Wonder Bread. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments what other food stories you'd like to hear. This story might just be the biggest disaster since sliced bread, but bread's journey through history is far more intriguing than its simple recipe suggests. There's a reason it's called the staff of life. Worldwide, bread has always been a crucial staple. Ever wonder why we use bread or dough as slang for money? It dates back to ancient Egyptians, who not only discovered bread through sourdough, but also paid wages in loaves and beer. We wouldn't mind reviving that tradition at the very least. Beer should be included in every benefits package, or severance, for that matter. The Romans, too, knew the power of bread. They used it to prevent social unrest, providing plenty of bread and entertainment to keep the people happy. Imagine sitting at the Colosseum, cheering with a mouthful of focaccia, while watching the bodies get dragged away. Nothing like a delicious dose of artisanal bloodlust. Fun fact, the Romans also paid their workers in bread, and bakers eventually rose to the level of civil officials. Did you know that the sandwich was invented in 1762 in England? Gambling fanatic John Montagu, the 4th Earl of Sandwich, asked for roast beef between 2 slices of bread, so he wouldn't have to leave the card table for dinner. A true pioneer of multitasking, eating with one hand and playing cards with the other. Today, Americans consume over 300 million sandwiches a day, often while playing smartphone games with one hand. Montagu would surely be proud. But how did bread become so white? The Egyptians ground grain into flour, using hand stones and a basic sifting method to remove bits of stone and other debris. The ancient Greeks improved the process with a horse-powered hourglass mill, and the Romans took it further by inventing the water-powered mill. Yet for centuries, the whitest flour was reserved for the elite. That changed in the 1830s, when the traditional method of grinding grain between 2 stones was revolutionized by the invention of the roller mill. Early versions were underwhelming, but Swiss engineer Jacob Selburger perfected the design. He placed 2 sets of rollers in a frame, one above the other. The first rollers cracked the wheat berry, separating the germ and oil from the flour, while the second set, made of chilled steel, broke down the starchy endosperm into fine white flour. Without the oily parts, this flour lasted longer. The roller mill became widely used in Hungary, earning the nickname Hungarian mill, which, by the way, sounds like an awkward dance move. Ultra-fine white flour was exported across Europe and gained special acclaim in Vienna, where it was used to create pastries like croissants and Kaiser rolls. At the 1873 World's Fair in Vienna, Americans got their first taste of these treats and wanted the flour for themselves. Given the vast grain production of the Great Plains, it was only natural. In 1879, Minnesota Governor William Washburn brought Hungarian engineers to the United States and had roller mills constructed throughout the state, leading to an abundance of white flour in America. Before the mid-19th century, bread in the United States was typically dense, dark and grainy, like a classic 1950 sci-fi B movie full of texture and flavor. However, innovations such as mechanical slicers and refined flour made bread soft, white, and perfectly suited for a bologna sandwich. Up until the late 19th and early 20th centuries, most bread was made locally, with grains often processed at home, typically by women who adhered to a strict schedule of dough fermentation. Some communities had small commercial bakeries, and by 1886, the Bakery and Confectionery Workers International Union of America had been formed, with many chapters dominated by immigrant workers. By 1903, Much of the membership consisted of German immigrant bakers, meaning a trip to the local bakery often meant buying bread from a German immigrant. German bread was dark, coarse, and unrefined, qualities considered unclean at the time. As a result, dark bread became associated with the lower class. Immigrant-run bakeries were often located in hot, cramped basements where bread was left out, exposed to dirt and pests. Many consumers viewed these bakeries as unsanitary, which wasn't entirely inaccurate. The poor quality of bread in these bakeries helped reinforce negative stereotypes about immigrants. Growing concern about food safety eventually led to the Pure Foods and Drug movement in the mid to late 19th century, which increased scrutiny on food production. By the 1840s, the federal government began regulating food and drugs, and by the 1880s, states were overseeing food production. As bread production industrialized, food safety legislation kept pace. The industrialization of bread didn't happen overnight, but the Ward Baking Company played a major role in the shift. Hugh Ward, an Irish immigrant who arrived in the United States in 1849, opened his own bakery in Brooklyn, where he worked and lived for 6 years. Seeking new opportunities, he relocated to Pittsburgh, where he started another bakery. By 1897, Ward's sons, Robertson and George, merged their business with a successful cracker company. In 1903, they opened Pittsburgh's first modern sanitary bakery. The Ward brothers rapidly expanded throughout the Midwest, introducing new technologies such as mechanical mixers, dough kneaders, loaf shapers, tunnel ovens, and bread wrappers. Their clean, uniform white bread was sold under the Tip Top brand in grocery stores until the 1950s. After a series of mergers, Ward Baking Company became known as Wonder Bakeries, the creators of Wonder Bread. Hopefully, a light bulb just went off, fluffy and white, of course. By 1930, white bread had become wildly popular in the United States, with 90% of the bread consumed being factory-made white bread. It had its champions, like Dr. Woods Hutchinson, who in his article, "Some Diet Delusions," criticized the undue praise given to brown bread. He pointed out that, throughout history, people had always preferred the cleanest and whitest bread available, and no civilization ever ate black bread, when white was an option, not even brown, yellow, or any other mulatto shade. Clearly, Hutchinson had never tried black rye bread. In the April 1906 issue of McClure's magazine, Hutchinson's 12-page reflection on food argued that darker bread was misunderstood, especially in terms of the nitrogen content of grains. His words went against some vocal critics of white bread, like Presbyterian minister and health reformer Sylvester Graham, who argued that white bread was bland, deceptive, and prone to additives like chalk, clay, and even plaster. White was the plaster for color or texture. Graham advised making bread at home using rich, coarse ingredients, and in 1839, a writer praised his ideas, offering a recipe with 6 quarts of wheatmeal, a cup of yeast, half a cup of molasses, warm water, milk, and a teaspoon of pearl ash. Sounds tasty. Meanwhile, Bernard McFadden, a well-known fitness guru in the 1930s, claimed that white bread had made him sick. He waged war against what he called the staff of death, claiming that eating it weakened people. McFadden also believed fasting could cure any disease and that tight clothing was bad for your health. McFadden wrote many books on food, health, and fitness, attracting followers like Charles Atlas and Jack LaLanne, who also rejected white bread. Ironically, McFadden died from a digestive illness after refusing medical treatment, dismissing doctors as quacks. He tried to cure himself with grape seeds, his go-to remedy for cancer. Wonder Bread was first made in the 1920s by the Taggart Baking Company, which was acquired in 1925 by a descendant of Hugh Ward. It wasn't until the 1930s that Wonder Bread became a market hit, offering a larger, convenient loaf. While other store-bought loaves weighed a pound, Wonder Bread was a pound-and-a-half of machine-sliced, untouched, fluffy goodness. That extra half pound packed in more flavor. Representing progress and perfection, the pre-cut, pre-packaged, ultra-white loaf was a symbol of American innovation. Its marketing, with bright colors and visual purity, mirrored the excitement around America's future, embodied by the massive manufacturing system. And remember, the phrase "the greatest thing since sliced bread" was once meant literally. During World War I, white bread and wheat became precious resources, prompting war rationing campaigns, encouraging people to use alternatives like cornmeal and oats. After the war, though, people eagerly returned to white bread because, let's face it, oat bread doesn't quite cut it. By the 1920s, factory-made white bread was everywhere, and by the 1930s and 1940s, Americans were getting more calories from it than any other food. By 1940, as the United States prepared for World War II, a health crisis emerged. Poverty and the Great Depression had left many young men too malnourished to serve in the military. At least 30% were deemed unfit due to health issues related to malnutrition. Meanwhile, some scientists noted that Germany and Russia's whole grain breads contributed to their strong soldiers. To address this, the United States began fortifying white bread and flour with vitamins and minerals like thiamine, niacin, iron, and riboflavin by 1943, ensuring Americans could enjoy their white bread while staying healthier. During World War II, the government briefly banned sliced bread to redirect resources, but public backlash led to the ban being lifted within months. Over the decades, bread trends shifted. The 1940s and 1950s saw innovations in bread production, including vitamin enrichment, but by the 1960s, white bread had become synonymous with bland and ordinary, much like today's comparison to Coldplay. By the 1970s, bread machines became popular and white bread sales began to decline. In 2009, whole wheat bread outsold white bread for the first time, and with heavier, specialized breads typically being more expensive, white bread has since become linked to poverty, a complete reversal of its original cultural status. Adding to this shift are low-carb diets like Atkins and keto, which echo some of McFadden's fitness philosophies. While the future of sliced white bread may seem uncertain, its simple, fluffy appeal has kept it a staple of bologna sandwiches for over a century, and likely will for many more. What are your thoughts on Wonder Bread? Share them in the comments below. If you're curious about American foods that are banned in other countries, click on the right. Or, for something usual, click on the left.